Namaskar. On behalf of Mola Mutha Publication, I, Manju Dhamankar, extend a very warm welcome to the honorable guests, panelists, and the august gathering in this auditorium for the book launch of Raghoba, The Assassination of Narayanrao Peshwa, yet another well-researched book on Maratha history, which is an annotated, illustrated, non-fiction account penned by Dr. Uday Kulkarni. आता नुकतीच एक दुर्दैवी घटना घडली. श्रीमंत बाजीराव पेशवे यांचे वंशज श्रीमंत उदयसिंह पेशवा यांचं एक 4 दिवसापूर्वीच दुःखद निधन झालं. आपण 1 मिनिट उभं राहून त्यांना श्रद्धांजली अर्पण करूया. आज विशेष सांगायचं म्हणजे श्रीमंत उदयसिंह पेशवा आपल्यात नसले तरी आय एम शुअर ही इज देअर इन स्पिरिट, पण त्यांची पुतणी, त्यांचा मुलगा, नात हे आवर्जून आज इथे उपस्थित आहेत. त्याबद्दल त्यांचे मनपूर्वक आभार. And now we'll invoke the blessings of Goddess Saraswati. शुक्लां ब्रह्मविचारसार परमां आद्यां जगद्व्यापिनीं हस्ते स्फटिकमालिकां विदधतीं पद्मासने संस्थितां वन्दे तां परमेश्वरीं भगवतीं बुद्धिप्रदां शारदां. The flow of today's events is as follows. The author, Dr. Uday Kulkarni, will present a brief slideshow and then speak about the process of the creation of this book. After that, the chief guest, Padma Shri Pratap Pawar, the panelists, Professor Pradeep Apte, Professor Gaurav, Gadgil, and Mr. Amit Paranjape will be invited onto the dais for the book launch, followed by their speeches. And then there will be a panel discussion, which will be held by Mr. Amit Paranjape. Dr. Uday Kulkarni is a trained surgeon. He has served in the Indian Navy and proceeded on voluntary retirement in the rank of Surgeon Commander. Dr. Uday Kulkarni has authored several non-fiction books dealing with the 18th century Maratha history, Indian history, namely Solstice at Panipat, Bakhar of Panipat, The Extraordinary Epoch of Nana Sahib Peshwa, The Maratha Century, and The Mastery of Hindustan, Triumphs and Travels of Madhavrao Peshwa. He has also authored a richly illustrated book, James Wales, Artist and Antiquarian in the Times of Peshwa Savai Madhavrao. This book is based on the works of James Wales, who spent many years in Western India in the 1790s. आणि आज प्रकाशन होणार आहे ते त्यांचं 8वं पुस्तक आहे. यापैकी 4 पुस्तकांचा अत्यंत समर्पक मराठी अनुवाद डॉक्टर कुलकर्णी यांच्याच सारखे आणखीन एक सर्जनशील सर्जन डॉक्टर विजय बापये यांनी केला आहे. डॉक्टर कुलकर्णी हॅज रिसीव्ड मेनी अवॉर्ड्स फॉर हिज work on Maratha and Indian history. He is an elected fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland and a recipient of the Shri Shivaji Raigad Puraskar, the Abasai Muzumdar Award, and the first Shiva Bhushan Ninad Bedekar Puraskar. And what is not written in his What is not written in his resume is that he's a very good singer too. All his close friends, of course, know this. I invite Dr. Kulkarni to present the slideshow.
Thank you, Manju. That was a wonderful introduction, and I'm sure everybody is suitably impressed. So, good morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today's chief guest, Padma Shri Pratap Pawar, Professor Pradeep Apte, a man of many talents, and of course, Professor Gaurav Gadgil, who is a very popular teacher of history in the Somaya University and who has come all the way from Bombay for this launch. So I welcome you all. And by the way, Manju was also my first book launch, the Master of Ceremonies. So it's great to have her for the last 14 years. I began my journey as an author on this very stage 14 years ago. And I still remember the thrill and trepidation I felt when I had Padma Vibhushan Baba Saheb Purandare next to me, and Narayanrao Bedekar was there, and my school teacher Abba Saheb Mahajan, who actually introduced me to so many things, trekking, climbing Sivamoghat at the age of 9 and so on. So they were the ones who released my book at that time. And there are many others like Dr. Bape is here, Pandurangrao Balkavade is here, who have been with me from the very first book and have at different times have prompted me and helped me in my journey in the last 14 years. And of course, I cannot forget Narayanrao, who was the first person I went to as a historian and who saw my first proofs and said, go ahead, made a few corrections so that I don't get into trouble. Writing history is more dangerous these days than performing surgery. So he told me what not to write in the book, and I've carried on from that point of view in the last so many years. So it has been a learning experience. I realize one thing is that what a vast ocean Indian history is, and how insignificant our own study is in this field, how little our knowledge, how difficult the journey that we have to chart the way to tell the real story, and then to find the right words to convey the message to the people. Because I've always felt that there has been a neglect of the 18th century. And because I started my work with Panipat, I kind of carried on into the 18th century. I didn't go back. And I feel very many eminent people, some of whom are here, I can see Dr. Kedar Phadke, who have written a lot about the 17th century and who are really experts in that. And I don't think I should try to venture into that field. Now, because I wear two caps, the author as well as the publisher, I'm the proprietor of Mula Mutha Publishers, which I founded in 2010. And I was hoping I'll get more time. But it's a Sunday morning, everybody has to get back for lunch. And so I'll first begin with a short slideshow, which will recap the journey and the subject that we are going to talk about today. So may I have the lights out, please? Thank you.
सुमरसिंगाच्या हातामध्ये कसला तरी हुकमाचा कागद दिलाय आणि म्हणाला तुकडं तुकडं झालं पाहिजे, काय बी करून.
काय झालं? काय गडबड आहे?
काय नाही, गारदी वाड्यात शिरले आहे, त्यांच्या गर्दीत लागला असेल कोणाला तरी.
गादी नारळाला मारताय?
नाही, आपल्या सुटपाची अंमलबजावणी करता असते.
त्याला मारायचा हुकूम दिला नाही
मी दिला आहे तसा हुकूम. तू? होय, तुमच्यासाठी, तुम्हाला राज्यात झाली काढण्यासाठी मी दिला आहे तो हुकूम. नाही, गादी आता ऐकणार नाही.
नाही नाही, मी मोर देणार नाही त्याला. आपल्या श्रीमंतांनी थोड्यासारखा खबर राहू तुला.
आता याला वाचत असेल तर मला मारा, माझ्यावर सरकार चालवा. एकदा हुकूम दिला, आता माघार घेता. अचानक राज्य जाईल, सगळ्यांची डोकी मारली जातील. माझं ऐका, टाका तलवार.
So, all right, that is the cinematic version of what might have happened. And looking at this clip, I can't help imagining that in the 1930s, a film of such technical quality could have been made by Prabhat Films. And one wishes that that company had really survived and went on for longer. But is this true, the cinematic version? That is the first question that comes to mind. There are many sources that give so many different narratives. And in this book, I have examined most of them. And I have, as usual, left the decision to the esteemed readers who will finally make up their mind. And that is the jury will be the readers who read this. I chose this date of 1st September for the launch of the book with a specific purpose in mind. Just 2 days back, on the 30th of August, was the 251st death anniversary of Narayanrao Peshwa. His samadhi, which lay behind the Sambhaji police station near Lakdi Pool, on the river bed. For reasons unknown a few decades ago, the Pune Municipal Corporation just uprooted it and threw it away somewhere. So all I have is a picture of the Samadhi, which I have published in this book. Now, after writing Panipat in 2011, it was the late Narayanrao who advised me to go back. I would have probably gone into Madhavrao and this book immediately after that. But he said, no, now you go back in the start from the beginning. So I started the next book from 1707 till 1740, which was the era of Bajirao. And I have remained true to the chronological narrative, except for two exceptions. One was the book on James Wales, and one was an overview of the Maratha period, 175 years in the Maratha century. And so I began the 250th anniversary of Panipat, and today is the 251st anniversary of Narayanrao Peshwa's murder. So I'm keeping pace with the 250th date. And it is very surprising that this assassination was the only example of a political assassination in the annals of Maratha history. And this is the real contrast with the repeated bloodletting you find in the house of Taimur and Delhi. And the difference in the two cultures was that individual political ambitions were capped at an ethical and moral level in the Maratha state in the 18th century. And that is why we did not get too many of such instances. Now, succession battles were, of course, a bane of feudal society. There were succession struggles in the 17th century as well. In the 18th century, we had the Jaipur succession, which involved a lot of Marathas, the Holkars, the Scindias. They all took part in that after Savai Jai Singh's death. And this was followed by after the death of Raghuji Bhosle of Nagpur. Nagpur's succession struggle started with that, which are described in this book. Then we had a succession struggle after the death of Chhatrapati Shahu. We had a succession struggle after the death of the Scindias at Panipat. 3 or 4 members of the family were lost at Panipat. The Holkars after the death of Mallara Holkar and Tukoji Holkar. And so the Gaikwads, of course, after the death of Damaji Gaikwad, his sons were fighting for a very long time. And finally this disease hit the Peshwas after the death of Nana Sahib and Sadashirao Bhau. And it came to this stage 12 years later with the assassination of Narayanrao. When Raghoba Dada first sought a division in the kingdom in the time of Madhavrao, I have given it in my book, Madhavrao answered, "He Rajya konache? Mi denara kon? Sarva tumis gya. This is not my kingdom, it's everybody's kingdom. You take it if you whatever you want, I'll stay out of this." And surprisingly, Narayanrao is found to have uttered similar sentiments when Raghoba asked for a division of the kingdom in his time. But this time it ended differently. So this book talks about the entire episode and its aftermath. Aftermath also I have given to a certain extent. But that is not all. It was the beginning of a slippery slope. For a while it was checked. But at the back of it, however, what we find as we grow deeper into the 18th century was a lack of national spirit among all the component parts of the Maratha Empire. Personal gains became more important than national interest. And perhaps things have not much changed over the last 2 centuries. In spite of that, how did the others see the Marathas? Warren Hastings, who was a key man in this period, he became the Governor General in 1774 and he fought the first Anglo-Maratha war till 1782. In 1783, when he wrote his memoirs, he first mentions that there are so many component parts in the Marathas, they keep fighting with each other. Then having mentioned different interests which seem to divide the present members of the Maratha state, I should leave the subject imperfect. Imperfect meaning it will be incomplete. Were I not to add that the Marathas possess alone of all the people of Hindustan and Deccan a principle of national attachment which is strongly impressed on the minds of all individuals of the nation and would probably unite their chiefs as in one cause if any great danger were to threaten the general state. And we saw that in the Battle of Kharda as late as 1795 when all of them got together to fight the Nizam. This was true for a while, but when the internal divisions among the Marathas became stronger and the animosities kept growing, this spirit of nationalism which had been kind of nurtured right from the middle of the 17th century was overcome by this personal interest, and that is when the empire perished. We did not have to have an invader to defeat us. We kind of defeated ourselves. But as I keep saying, the importance of the Marathas is that it is the first indigenous empire after many centuries of, for want of a better word, slavery. Because it was a foreign rule, a foreign language, a foreign jurisprudence, and there were different levels of promotion for different people based on their ancestry. And before Chhatrapati Shivaji's time, we were second-class citizens. So the greatest achievement of the Swarajya of Chhatrapati Shivaji was that we were raised out of that slavery. In fact, Swarajya is used for the first time in Chhatrapati Shivaji's time and the second time when Lokmanya Tilak used it. So these are only 2 times when, and that is because that time we were in a Pararajya. So the fiercest attack which came on the Marathas in 1782 was by Aurangzeb, and for 25 years, by their tenacity, their resilience, their burning quest for freedom, the Marathas fought back and defeated the invader until Aurangzeb had to be buried in the soil of the Deccan. If we are what we are today, it is because of this magnificent fight for Swarajya by kings and prime ministers who placed national interest up there. But 1770 is the time which marks the beginning of the Uttar Peshwai. You find there is no real person in control, and power, which had moved from the Chhatrapati to the Peshwa after 1750. After 1773, from the Prime Minister, it moved to a group of ministers and generals. And that is how it remained. In fact, nearly 25 to 30 years later, there was a poet called Shahir Prabhakar, and he has lamented, "Ithun suru zahala adbhut pralayacha." So this is where the whole thing started descending into anarchy. So this story of personal ambition is a mirror to all of us even today, when the pursuit of power above all is the aim of anybody aiming for elected office. The perks of office are very many, and eventually this submerges all nobler sentiments a man may have had. In this book, there are many new additions to the well-known story of Narayanrao's murder. For example, I have printed a 1921 copy of a 1796 map of the Shaniwarwada with all the places. That time it was written in Modi script, which I have converted into English and printed that there. There are various hakikats which have been published of this time. And those hakikats, you can see from where Narayanrao started running towards Raghoba Dada's Vada. First he went to Parvati Bai, then he went to Raghunath Rao. And from where the Gardis entered and how they chased him. So that another map I have drawn of their path which they took. For the first time, a new Bakhar has been published, which is the Bakhar of, it is just called the Bakhar of Narayanrao's assassination. It was in Marathi, it was lying in the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain for nearly 200 years. And I found it many years back, it was lying with me. So this was the time I have used the Marathi version and translated it into English also. And it gives you many new insights, which were not known till so far. Then again, the story of Dhama, how far is it true? The beginning of the Bar Bhai, which is called the ministerial party in English records. Was Anandibai guilty? That is the million-dollar question. What was Raghoba's personality like? Various people who have come in contact with him have written what was Raghoba like as a person, what was Anandibai like. And what role did Mahatji Shinde, Tukoji Holkar, the Patwardhans, Haripant Phadke, Nana Phadnis, Sakharam Bapu, Trimbakrao Pethe, all stalwarts of the time, what role did they play in this entire conflict that was building up? That has been aptly brought out in all these, in this book. But there are still many questions, and I'm sure with Professor Gadgil and Professor Apte, we will have a panel discussion where Amit will try to bring out more things, details from the book. So I will not disclose them all right now. The book took about 15 months to finish, which I would say was a little slower than usual, because my first book on Panipat I could finish in 4 months. So I think age is catching up. But I'll put it down to growing commitments over the time. There's a lot of difficult work ahead, I know that. And before the history of the 18th century, India centered on the Marathas because they were the paramount power of the 18th century, is placed on record with references for anybody to use in the years to come. I hope to continue plodding along this rather lonely path because it is very lonely. Research is done by one person, it cannot be done by a committee. And unless there is a major interruption of some sorts. As of now, I have no target here until which I will complete the story. We'll take it as it comes. Every successive book will cover shorter periods of time because the amount of material available keeps growing over the year as you go further into the 18th century. New findings come up occasionally. Archives have to be hunted for material. There are three huge archives in Pune itself which have not been sufficiently read, and a lot of work has to be done. And I'm aware researchers are doing a great job in this direction. Wish them all the best. Finally, a message from this book which we can say is that we have to end these divisions amongst ourselves. The Marathas did a great job in the 18th century. However, unless unified narrative goes out to the whole world, that the Maratha century started in 1746 and ended in the first half of the first 25 years of the 19th century, and it is all one continuous story. Unless a unified narrative goes to the rest of the world, their great task and contribution in creating the political and cultural India of the 20th and 21st centuries will not be realized. So on that note, I'll stop and thank you all for a patient hearing.
Thank you, Uday. And I would like to add that Dr. Uday Kulkarni is not only writing about history, but he is also making history by writing a series of books based on only research and no artistic liberty. So from all of us, we really wish him that he keeps on writing and we get to gather here for many more of his book publications. मी आता सर्व पाहुण्यांना मंचावर येण्याची विनंती करते. माननीय प्रतापराव पवार, प्रोफेसर प्रदीप आपटे, प्रोफेसर गौरव गाडगिळ आणि श्री अमित परांजपे, आपण सर्वांनी कृपया मंचावर यावं. पाहुण्यांचं स्वागत करूया. मी डॉक्टर उदय कुलकर्णी यांना विनंती करते की आजचे प्रमुख पाहुणे पद्मश्री प्रतापराव पवार, हेड ऑफ द सकाळ ग्रुप यांचं स्वागत करावं. I request Dr. Kulkarni to welcome and felicitate Professor Pradeep Apte, Professor Emeritus, Department of Economics, Gokhale Institute. आता डॉक्टर कुलकर्णी स्वागत करतील प्रोफेसर गौरव गाडगिल, असोसिएट प्रोफेसर ऑफ हिस्ट्री, सोमय्या युनिव्हर्सिटी, मुंबई. आणि श्री अमित परांजपे, टेक्नॉलॉजी एंटरप्रेनर. सो अगेन अ व्हेरी वॉर्म वेलकम टू ऑल द गेस्ट्स. आणि आज सभागृहात सुद्धा सगळेच उपस्थित असलेला प्रत्येक जणच मान्यवर आहे, त्यामुळे कुणाचीच नावं मी घेत नाही आहे, तर सर्व मान्यवरांचं पुन्हा एकदा मुळा मोठा पब्लिकेशनतर्फे मी मनपूर्वक स्वागत करते. It is often said that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But to remember the past and to learn from it, we have to know not the fictional history, but a factual one. नारायणराव पेशव्यांचा खून ही मराठ्यांच्या इतिहासातली एक काळी घटना. त्याबद्दल माझ्यासारख्या सामान्य व्यक्तींनी जे काय ऐकलं आहे, वाचलं आहे, पाहिलं आहे, ते गोष्टीरूप इतिहासातून, ज्यामध्ये आर्टिस्टिक लिबर्टी घेतलीच जाते थोडीफार किंवा बरीचशी, त्यातले 2 वाक्प्रचार नारायणराव पेशव्यांच्या खुनाच्या गोष्टीतनं जे आपल्याला मिळालेले आहेत मराठी भाषेमध्ये, ते म्हणजे काका मला वाचवा आणि धचामा. पण ही घटना नक्की कशी घडली यावर अगदी पुराव्यासकट कुठलीही झालर न जोडता निखळ संशोधनावर आधारित असं मला वाटतं हे पहिलंच इंग्लिश पुस्तक असावं, करेक्ट मी इफ आय एम रॉंग. तर अशा ह्या अनोख्या आणि इतिहासात अतिशय मोलाची भर टाकणाऱ्या पुस्तकाचं प्रकाशन करावं अशी मी सर्वांना विनंती करते. पुस्तकं रॅप करताना सेलोटेप न लावल्यामुळे अतिशय सोपं झालं काम, नाही तर फाडावं लागतं बऱ्याच वेळा. हे पुस्तक अर्थातच बाहेर विक्रीला आहेच, काही जणांनी आधी ते घेतलंही असेल आणि ज्याने आधी सह्या घेतल्या नसतील त्यावर डॉक्टर कुलकर्णींची स्वाक्षरीही मिळेलच. आता प्रकाशित झालेल्या या पुस्तकाची मूळ किंमत 825 रुपये आहे, पण आज ते फक्त 700 रुपयात मिळणार आहे, त्यामुळे या सवलतीचा अवश्य लाभ घ्या. तसंच आज डॉक्टर कुलकर्णी यांच्या इतर पुस्तकांवर देखील सवलत आहे आणि आजच नाही तर थेट मुळामोठा प्रकाशनाकडून डॉक्टर कुलकर्णींचं कोणतंही पुस्तक विकत घेणाऱ्यांना 2 ते 15 सप्टेंबरपर्यंत कुठल्याही एका पुस्तकावर 15% सवलत आहे आणि ही डिस्काउंट कुपन्स बाहेर पुस्तक विक्रीच्या टेबलवर उपलब्ध आहेत. द पॅनलिस्ट फॉर टुडे, डॉक्टर गौरव गाडगिल, works as an associate professor in the School of Civilization at Somaya Vidyavihar University, Mumbai. He is a research-oriented academician with 15 years of experience and a wide array of interests which spans from political and cultural history to literary history to international relations. Dr. Gadgil has been an invited speaker at prestigious institutions like NCPA Mumbai, University of Baroda, Asiatic Society of Bengal, Calcutta University, Nagpur Literary Festival, amongst others. नंतर होणाऱ्या पॅनल डिस्कशनमध्ये आपण त्यांना ऐकणारच आहोत, पण आत्ता मी त्यांना त्यांचं मनोगत व्यक्त करण्याची विनंती करते. डॉक्टर गौरव गाडगिल.
Good morning to the August gathering, and heartiest congratulations to Dr. Kulkarni on bringing yet another fascinating book on a theme that interests everyone who wants to have a relook at 18th century history of the Indian subcontinent. All the dignitaries present on the days and of it. Now, there is a renewed interest into the developments which have taken in the 18th century. Now, it has been discussed amongst the history circles as the great 18th century debate, and there was a serious lack of material. We discussed Dr. Kulkarni's 3 books at Nehru Center, Mumbai, and there's a tremendous gap in literature when it comes to English books on 18th century Maratha history, with no new editions that had been made over the last few decades at least. And with new sources coming up and new insights, this has been a fascinating journey of having a relook at an important epoch, a period which redefined the history of the Indian subcontinent as a whole, not just what were the developments taking place in the western or the central parts of India. So special thanks to Dr. Kulkarni for that. Now, when we talk about the 18th century political systems and the role of the Marathas into it and the way the Maratha state has evolved, it is a journey that has been there, witnessed from the time period of Peshwa Bajirao right till Narayanrao's time period. And the transformation of the Maratha state, as could be seen, is something that interests me personally. Now, when we talk about the Maratha state's evolution from the 17th century, from Chhatrapati Shivaji's time period, from a unified system to how it became a confederacy in the 18th century, now that's a journey which also needs to be understood from a state-oriented perspective. How it started from a small part of Western Maharashtra and became the paramount power, as he rightly mentions, by the middle of the 18th century, and the decline and the fall of it. Now, one part that we constantly focus on history is not only the rise, but also eventual decline and fall. And it is not a very simple process to explain, as to it's not the role of one individual or one event. And there are multiple players in the background. The same is the story with assassination of Narayanrao Peshwa. It's a highly complex matter. There are so many players associated in it. And in popular literature, in 18th century history, there has been a lot of popular literature that has come in, which has easily mixed fact with fiction. And there are certain narratives which we constantly believe in. As he was speaking, Dhatsa Ma Kela Gela, and you have so many other narratives, including the role of Gardis, and how a complex situation from a socio-cultural perspective it was there. So many dynamics, from caste to political rivalries, to personal gains that had to be made. Now, all of them interplaying together, and more importantly, this complex story being narrated in such a fascinating and lucid way. So, the style of Dr. Kulkarni's writing is something that fascinates me because it is lucid narration, it hooks on, and a person cannot drop the book till the entire book is completed. So that's something that I really look forward to Dr. Kulkarni's book. I'm not delving too many intricate episodes from the story because I'm sure that everyone is wanting to know more. We'll be discussing a few more things eventually in the panel discussion as well. But this is a time period which paves the way eventually for the English domination. And the role of the topikar, as he says, as he has pointed out, the terminology that was used in the 18th century, the role of the English is perhaps the most important role to look out for because that sets the path in the last quarter of the 18th century. So thank you, Dr. Kulkarni, for such a fascinating book and look forward to the panel discussion as well.
Thank you, Professor Gadgil. आजचे दुसरे पॅनलिस्ट प्रोफेसर प्रदीप आपटे, Professor Emeritus, Department of Economics, Gokhale Institute. He has a vast experience of undergraduate as well as postgraduate teaching at various reputed institutes. Areas of his expertise and specialization are operations research, econometrics, international trade and finance, public economics and taxation, agricultural economics, and so on. He has been a consultant and advisor for many government agencies, as well as the World Bank, Pune Stock Exchange, and so on. He is the Vice President, Regulatory Council of Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute since 2018 till date. He is the Chairman, Academic Research Committee, Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute from 2018 till date. and is at Director Research, Pune International Center. Professor Pradeep Apte is the recipient of Pandurangi Memorial Prize for the best MPhil dissertation awarded by the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. He has done extensive research in various areas and has a number of books and publications to his credit. He too will be a panelist in the panel discussion, but I request him to address the audience at this time.
First and foremost, thank you, Dr. Uday Kulkarni, for inviting us. I don't deem myself to be a great expert in this area, though I happen to be a reader of most of the literature that is, in fact, principally often produced in Pune. And I am associated with another institution, almost like sister institution of our Bhandarkar, that is Bharat Itihas Sanshodak Mandal. The importance of this book, or rather all of his books, is that it's a history which should be written like history. I think last week Ganesh Devi talked about writing about history. It's something like looking at the night where only 10% due to moon is available and rest of it is not available. And that's, of course, a dilemma. What happens is typically the authors tend to take advantage of that 90% darkness and produce whatever visitations and the speculations they can widely make. So in a way, having this kind of a book probably will educate people what it really means to have a history book, which should be evidence-based. Of course, there are many things which are not unknown. There are many dots which can't be so easily connected. But that does not mean, in fact, there should be a difference between what can be called as a conjecture and a wild speculation. Conjecture requires to be stated, but not always proven or adequately supported by the evidence available. But the speculation could be as wild as that. Unfortunately, this latter part is something which is now rampantly available in all epochs of history, and that is something which needs to be fought for. One thing which I would like to mention, because there are many people who know Pune, and we also there for Pune University. When history department was shifted from Deccan College to Pune University, the condition that was laid was that they should carry research in Maratha history. This is a promise which remains unfulfilled by all means. Most sad thing is we have in fact a very vast collection of the documents of those time, which are not only in Pune, but in Pune, Narayanrao is here probably, he is one of the one who has probably seen most part of it. But getting it digitized, getting it read, converted, edited, commented, it's something which is a very, very big task. Crores of paper. But we have not really moved, though only in recent time, Itihas Sanshodak Mandal, with the help of one NRI and one resident Indian, have started digitizing it and started putting it into an accessible paper. So work that was started as what was called Niudak Kagad in the early phase of Bharat Itihas Sanshodak Mandal probably could be revived. And if you look at this book, you will realize what is the role played by such kind of evidence, because this book is in fact dotted with so many kinds of citations from principal major sources, which are more or less beyond doubt. And he indulges in no speculation. He in fact states them. The most important, in fact, after reading the book, let me tell you my impression was, there is an appendix to some of the chapters. And those appendix are in fact very fascinating and more readable than the story itself. And this is something which is a very characteristics of this book, and I think he should be congratulated for this, because that highlights what kind of an effort an historian needs to incur if one somewhere to write that. And of course, there is no great clash between the publisher Uday Kulkarni and the writer Uday Kulkarni. Consequently, the book has been very splendidly designed, illustrated, and published without no things spent. So it's a very highly well-printed, well-presented kind of a book, and I'm pretty sure there are many aspects of this problem, many aspects of this century. Probably we will discuss some of them in the subsequent discussion, but I think I would recommend this book. I think probably in this book, your style of writing has undergone a change, and even a better change. So thank you for that, and I will stop at that.
Thank you, Professor Apte. Our Honorable Chief Guest, Padma Shri Pratap Pawar, is an industrialist and Chairman and Managing Director of Sakal Papers Private Limited. The Government of India awarded him Padma Shri Award in 2014 for his contribution to trade and history in India. Mr. Pawar is a former president of the Maharashtra Chamber of Commerce, Industries and Agriculture, Pune, the Indian Newspaper Society, and the Indian Language Newspapers Association. He is a member of Executive Committee of the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers, Paris, and a UGC nominee at the Press Council of India. He also serves as on the director boards of several companies like Bharat Forge, Kirloskar Oil Engines, Phenolics Cables, and so on. विद्यार्थ्यांसाठी काम करणाऱ्या विद्यार्थी सहाय्यक समितीचे ते 1981 पासून विश्वस्त आहेत. पुना स्कूल अँड होम फॉर ब्लाइंड, बालग्राम, बालकल्याण संस्था यासारख्या सुमारे 12हून अधिक संस्थांचे ते पदाधिकारी आहेत. पुण्यभूषण पुरस्काराचेही ते मानकरी आहेत. गेलं वर्षभर सकाळच्या सप्तरंग पुरवणीमध्ये त्यांनी या आत्तापर्यंतच्या प्रवासामध्ये जे अनुभव गाठीशी बांधले त्याची शिदोरी त्या एका सदरातून खुली केली. अनुभवे आले, पण ते वर्षभर पुढच्या रविवारची वाट बघायला लागायची पुढचा अनुभव वाचण्यासाठी. पण आता ते पुस्तक आलेले आहे, त्यामुळे ते सलग आपल्याला वाचता येतील. तसंच वाटचाल हेही त्यांचं आत्मचरित्रपर पुस्तक लोकप्रिय आहे. तर मी पद्मश्री प्रतापराव पवार यांना विनंती करते की त्यांनी श्रोत्यांशी संवाद साधावा.
सन्माननीय व्यासपीठ, डॉक्टर उदय कुलकर्णी आणि उपस्थित बंधू भगिनींनो, सुरुवातीला हे प्रकाशन झालं असं मी जाहीर करतो आणि एक चांगल्या मौल्यवान ठेवा या निमित्तानं आपल्याकडे पोहोचला आहे हे मी निश्चितपणे सांगू शकेन की मी ते पुस्तक वाचलं आहे. उदय, तुमचं पुन्हा एकदा मनपूर्वक अभिनंदन करतो. तुमच्या पुढच्या पुस्तकांच्या कामाला, इतिहासाच्या कामाला शुभेच्छा देतो. आणि असंच इतिहास जो भारतामध्ये माझ्या मते एक निग्लेक्टेड सब्जेक्ट आहे, आपल्याला फारशी आस्था नाही असं माझं व्यक्तिगत मत आहे. आणि त्याच्यामुळं आपल्याला जे काही प्रकार चांगलं घडलेलं आहे त्याची माहिती फारशी मिळत नाही. जे घडलं, आपले पराभव झाले मुघल आणि ब्रिटिश, हाच इतिहास फक्त आपल्याला शिकवला गेला. आणि त्यामुळे एक मनावरती सावट आहे की आपण नेहमी डिफ्युटेड लोक आहोत म्हणून. तर तो चांगला काळ होता, बोलायला पाहिजे असं मला नेहमी वाटतं, पण त्याला महत्त्व कमी दिलं गेलेलं आहे असं माझं वैयक्तिक मत आहे. मला एक 2-3 गोष्टी फक्त सांगायच्या आहेत या पुस्तकाबाबतीमध्ये. मी फारसं बोलणार नाही आहे, फायनल डिस्कशन होईल. पण माझ्या आयुष्यामध्ये मी एकदा अथेन्सला गेलो होतो. आम्ही उभयता दोघं पती पत्नी, आणि मला मुद्दाम तिथे 2-3 दिवस राहायचं होतं. आणि मुद्दाम तिथे मी म्हटलं की बा नुसतं गाव पाहण्याच्या ऐवजी कोणी एखादी व्यक्ती आहे की जी मला इतिहास भूगोल सगळं सांगेल आणि मला समजून घ्यायचं सगळे. एक चुणचुणीत मुलगी पोस्ट ग्रॅज्युएशन करणारी आम्हाला दिली गेली आणि ती अतिशय चांगली होती. आमची मैत्री झाली. शेवटच्या दिवशी मी तिला म्हणलं जेवायला येतेस का? ती म्हणली हो, मी आनंदाने येते, मला आवडेल, कारण मला तुम्हाला जेवण नेणं परवडणार नाही म्हणून मी वाटच बघत होते. म्हणलं ठीक आहे. मग ते एकटिकाच्या गप्पा झाल्या, जेवण छान झालं. ते म्हणून तुम्हाला एक प्रश्न विचारू का व्यक्तिगत? म्हणलं विचार, मला शक्य असेल ते उत्तर देईन. ते म्हणलं युरोपमध्ये इतक्या चांगल्या गोष्टी पाहण्यासारख्या आहेत, इतकी स्थळं आहेत, या सगळे डिस्ट्रक्शन झालेली या गावामध्ये अथेन्समध्ये तुम्ही का आलात? इथं काय पाहण्यासारखं? सगळं तर डिस्ट्रक्शन आहे. ते म्हणलं मी उत्तर देतो, तुला वाईट वाटेल. ते म्हणजे नाही, सांगा. म्हणलं माझ्या देशामध्ये काय घडले मला माहिती आहे. गेल्या 1000 वर्षात आमच्या परकीयांनी राज्य केलेलं आहे, त्याची कारणं मला माहिती आहेत. तुझ्या देशामध्ये अलेक्झांडर द ग्रेट, विश्वविजेता, अरिस्टॉटल, सॉक्रेटिस असे तत्त्ववेत्ते निर्माण झाले आणि तुझ्या देशात 3000 वर्ष इतरांनी राज्य केलेलं आहे. हे का हे मला समजून घ्यायचं. वेळात पाणी आहेत त्यांनी आमच्या त्या आपापसाची भांडणं, आम्हाला दुसरा माणूस चालला पण आमच्यातलं नको. या वृत्तीमुळं आमच्यावरती 3000 वर्ष राज्य केले गेलं आहे. हाच इतिहास आपल्याला इथेही सापडतो आणि त्याची पुनरावृत्ती आज सगळ्यात आपल्याला अगदी या नवीन मिनिस्ट्रीमध्ये सुद्धा सापडते. व्यक्तिगत स्वार्थ, ईर्ष्या, हेवेदावे, हे जी कॅरेक्टर भारतामध्ये किंवा लोकांची आहे त्याचे परिणाम आपण सगळे भोगतो आणि आशा आहे की इथून पुढे भोगणार नाही आहोत. इतिहासात महत्त्वाच्या वृत्तपत्रामध्ये आणखी एक गोष्ट मला सांगायची मी लिहिली आहे की 1413 साली स्कॉटलंडमध्ये सेंट अँड्रूज युनिव्हर्सिटी विद्यापीठ निर्माण केले गेले फक्त इतिहासाचा अभ्यास करण्याकरता आणि ते आजतागायत चालू आहे. 130 देशातील लोक राजे राजवाडे अगदी ब्रिटिश प्रिन्सेसपासून तिथे शिकतात आणि त्यांचा उद्देश असा आहे की कुठल्याही देशाचा आपण जर समाज, इतिहास, भूगोल सर समजून घेतला त्यांच्या कमतरता काय, त्यांची शक्तिस्थळं काय हे समजून घेता येतं आणि त्याच्यावर त्यांच्याशी कसं वागा हे ठरवता येतं. याचा ब्रिटिशांनी अतिशय उत्तम उपयोग करून घेतला. भारतावर त्यांनी 150 वर्ष आरामात राज्य केलं ते आपल्याच जीवावरती. आपलेच सैनिक, आपलीच माणसं, आपलेच सैन्य, आपलीच पोलीस, आपलेच अधिकारी, याचा म्हणजे पूर्ण लुटलं त्याने लोकांनी. पण त्याचा अभ्यास जो ब्रिटिशांनी केला आणि ज्या पद्धतीने हे सगळं समजावून घेतलं त्याचे निश्चितपणे त्यांचं कौतुक करायला पाहिजे. पुन्हा त्यातनं आपण फारसं काही शिकलेलं नाही आहोत की आमचे विकनेस त्यांनी कसे शोधले आणि आम्ही काय करायला हवं आहे. तर हा दुसरा एक भाग मला नेहमी अस्वस्थ करणार आहे. इतिहास हा विषय मला नेहमी अस्वस्थ करणारा विषय आहे. माझ्या आयुष्यामध्ये पहिल्यांदा वाटतं मी 11वीत होतो, परीक्षा चालू होती. ब्रह्मपुराणचं पुस्तक मी वाचलं, राजा शिवछत्रपती, आणि माझ्या डोळ्यापुढे संबंध ते दिसतं की आम्ही एकमेकांशी कसे वागतो आहोत, आमच्यातला जातीयवाद कसा आहे, आमच्यातले ईर्ष्या कशा आहेत, आमचे हे दवे कसे आहेत, त्याचे परिणाम आमच्या समाजावर काय झाले. त्या दिवसापासून माझ्यातला जातीवाद कोळशाचा राखेसारखा संपून गेला. एक पुस्तक ज्याने माझ्यावर खूप मोठा इम्पॅक्ट केला. मला एवढंच म्हणायचं की आपण जे वास्तव समजतो पण आपण शिकत नाही त्यातनं. आपल्या वर्तनातनं, आपल्या वागण्यातनं हे कुठंतरी दिसलं पाहिजे की वी आर वन. आणि आपण हे म्हणतो की आपली प्रचंड ताकद आहे, प्रचंड बुद्धिमत्ता आहे, निसर्गाने खूप दिलं आहे. हा देश जगाच्या पाठीवर नंबर 1चा होऊ शकतो. प्रश्न आहे कसा. आर यू युनायटेड. आणि हे जो पण आमच्या संबंध समाजामध्ये समजत नाही आहे, जाणीव होत नाही, तो पण हे वस्तुस्थिती असूनसुद्धा याचा परिणिती ही आपल्या शक्तीमध्ये याच्यामध्ये होणार नाही. माझे एक जपानी मित्र होते, तर ते म्हणले की प्रतापराव तुमच्या सोसायटीमध्ये आमच्या सोसायटीमध्ये एक बेसिक फरक आहे. म्हणजे काय हो, तर युअर्स इज अ हॉरिझॉन्टल सोसायटी, आवर्स इज अ व्हर्टिकल सोसायटी. म्हणजे काय, म्हणजे वाळू जशी असते, प्रत्येक वाळूचा कण हा वेगळा असतो. मुस्लिम समाज घ्या, एक फतवा काढला की डाऊन द लाईन सगळे करणार. आपल्याकडे तसं नाही आहे. आपण विचारतो तू कोण सांगणार, तू कुठल्या जातीचा, तू कुठल्या प्रांतातला, कुठल्या भाषेतला. इंडिव्हिज्युअल ओपिनियन्स, इंडिव्हिज्युअल बिहेवियर, इंडिव्हिज्युअल कॅरेक्टर. याच्यामुळं जसं आपण म्हणतो वाळूचे कण हे कधीच एकत्र येणार नाहीत. आणि या जॅपनीज तुम्ही पहा, एक जसे एखादी हे खांब असतो, एक वरनं ठोका मारले खालपर्यंत जातं, ते आपल्यात कधीच होणार नाही. वी आर इंडिव्हिज्युअलिस्टिक बाय कॅरेक्टर. हे त्याचं मत होतं. मला त्यातलं बरंचसं योग्य वाटलं. आणि ह्या सगळ्या गोष्टीचा परिणाम तुमच्या आयुष्यावर होतो, आपल्या वागण्यावर होतो. आणि ह्याची परिणिती आपल्याला असं म्हणता इतिहासामध्ये दिसते. पुस्तक जे तुम्ही लिहिलं आहे ते वाचताना वाईट वाटतं नाही कोणा की काय आहे आणि हे का घडलं, हे घडता कामा नये. आपण खूप चांगल्या स्थितीमध्ये होतो, पण एका काळानंतर हे हेवेदावे वाढायला लागतात. आणि जिथे जिथे घराणेशाही आहे ती 4थ्या-5व्या पिढीमध्ये ते संपतं. ते राज्य असो, संस्था असो, बिझनेस असो, असं खूप आपल्याला दिसतं. त्याचं कारण 4थ्या-5व्या पिढीत ती व्यक्ती पहिल्या इतकी कॉम्पिटंट असण्याची शक्यता फार कमी आहे आणि स्केलही खूप मोठं असतं. तर त्याचा दर्जा नसेल ते कोलॅप्स होतच. हा एक आपल्याकडे अनुभव आहे. इन्स्टिट्युशनलाइज आपण जरा म्हणतो की कॅरेक्टर, कामाची पद्धत, ती आपल्या देशात नाही आहे. त्याची काही कारणं आहे, पण या सगळ्या गोष्टींचा विचार थोडासा आपण जे सुशिक्षित आहोत, वाचतो करतो, तर आपल्या वागण्यामध्ये तरी तो यावा, दिसावा, आणि त्याचं परिणिती समाज सुधारण्यामध्ये, समाजासाठी कॉन्ट्रिब्युशन करण्यामध्ये, आपले व्यक्तिगत आपण काय करू शकतो या देण्यामध्ये व्हावी, अशी परिणिती व्हावी अशी माझ्यासारखीची इच्छा असते. आपण इथं मला बोलवलं, सत्कार केला, मी मनपूर्वक आभार मानतो. आणि तुम्हाला पुन्हा एकदा सदिच्छा आणि पिक्चर प्रॉस्पेक्टसाठी शुभेच्छा देतो आणि आपली रजा घेतो. धन्यवाद.
धन्यवाद. यानंतर पॅनल डिस्कशन होईल. त्यासाठी श्री अमित परांजपे, डॉक्टर गाडगीळ आणि प्रोफेसर आपटे यांनी मंचावरच थांबावं. आणि प्रमुख पाहुणे माननीय प्रतापराव पवार यांना विनंती की त्यांनी समोर प्रेक्षागृहात बसून या चर्चेचा आनंद घ्यावा. या पॅनल डिस्कशनमध्ये सहभागी होणारे डॉक्टर गाडगीळ आणि प्रोफेसर आपटे यांचा परिचय मी करून दिलेला आहे. अमित परांजपे जे सुकाणू या चर्चेचं ज्यांच्या हातात असणार आहे त्यांची मी थोडक्यात ओळख करून देते. Mr. Amit Paranspe is a technology entrepreneur based in Pune with 3 decades of experience in software, manufacturing, consulting, and other industries. He has a wide variety of interests in software, science and technology, history, economics, geopolitics, and public policy. He writes regularly in blogs, media, and Twitter. Amit Paranspe is the co-founder of ReliScore, a company providing online skills assessment solutions for the IT and software industry. He is a member of the Regulating Council of the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute. He is a member of the Board of Governors of the COEP Technological University. Amit Paranspe has until recently served as the chairman of the Software and IT Committee at the MCCIA and now serves on the Executive Committee. He is also an active charter member of the TIE, that is the Indus Entrepreneur Pune, and the Pune International Center. तर आता होणाऱ्या पॅनल डिस्कशनचं सुकाणू मी श्री अमित परांजपे यांच्या हाती सोपवते.
So thank you, Dr. Kulkarni, for giving me this opportunity to conduct a discussion. It's an absolute honor. I just realized that this is your 3rd book in a row that I have been fortunate to be associated with and have this discussion. So each of your books has been a great source of learning for me, and as I'm sure it is for all your readers. And one line that I was going to start with, unfortunately, Professor Apte stole it from me before I could say, and that is, this is one book where your writing style has significantly changed. And the reason I'm saying that is, I'm a big fan of Dr. Kulkarni's books for the last 15 years, but one of the criticisms, or I should say negative feedback that I've got from some of my close friends about Dr. Kulkarni's books is they are too dry and they are too theoretical, and they are just too many facts one after the other. So you lose someone who's not a hardcore history enthusiast. Well, let me tell you this, that this book reads in a much more different way. It's more interesting. It's more of a story. It's engrossing, it's interesting. I won't call it as far as a murder mystery, but it's going that way. And I do see another film being made on this at some point of time. But we'll come back to that. So let's get to this panel discussion. We're about 45 minutes, so I want to get into as many facets of this book as possible from our 3 panelists. Maybe towards the end, if we have a few minutes, I'll take a few audience pointed questions as well. So let's start. Dr. Kulkarni, let me start with you. You've given us a good summary of your research, your writing this book and all that. But let me ask you, what was different about this book in terms of your research, in terms of what you've... Clearly, your writing style has changed. So, what was your perspective in terms of writing this book, and how was it different from your previous 7 books?
Actually, over the period of time, I've realized what you're saying is quite often the case, because the last 2 books on Nana Sahib and Madhavrao were voluminous, 500, 600, 650 pages. And I've realized that the reading habit has kind of deteriorated over the years. And you cannot really hold an interest on one subject for 600 pages. Now, the difficulty then was that I had to find an end point. Now, the end point for Madhavrao obviously was the death of Madhavrao. The end point of Nana Sahib was Panipat. So these stories had to end where they ended. I could not have cut them halfway. Now, this book, because it centers around a very crisp and short, brief period of very dramatic history, I could begin in a very dramatic fashion also. Because, Kaustup Kasture is here and he has very nicely recreated a letter which I could not get from the Pune archives. But I wanted to put that letter on the first page because the irony of that letter, immediately you see it, you realize what is Narayanrao, that order which he has published. And so where I didn't get the original Modi papers from the archives, which are closed to researchers, practically, do you know Modi? You don't know Modi. Don't come here. Get a certificate that you know Modi. And then we will not give you the original papers. If you want a photograph, come after 90 days, you will get it. That is the way our government is functioning. So I had to recreate that letter, and Kaustup, of course, he's created a Modi script and he beautifully did that thing. So it was a dramatic event, starting with the funeral and all that. So obviously the style changed because the subject was different. The subject was no longer that, you're telling a narrative one after the other and going on. So that subject was the cause for this kind of a change. I hope I can keep up with it.
I think you've done the change very nicely, and I think this book particularly, I think will attract a lot of readers who were not your typical readers. So I think it does go out, like your Maratha Century book, it goes one more level beyond what your traditional readership is, and that's great. I will also mention that your idea about screening the Prabhat clip was brilliant. I think that's full credit to Prabhat for recreating what you just said nearly 100 years back with the quality that they did. That was really nice. Dr. Gadgil, let me come to you. One thing that you realize very quickly reading this book early on is the character of Narayanrao. Obviously there's a lot of discussion in this book about Raghoba. That's the first name in the title as well. And he was a very complex person, and we'll get into his personality as well. But before that, let's talk about Narayanrao as a person. Clearly, he had an illustrious elder brother, he had an illustrious father, he had an illustrious grandfather. So he was essentially following a big legacy. But his personality, I'm not sure what is the best word to describe it. So let me just ask you to give us a short and a long version of Narayanrao's personality.
No, in fact, many a times the problem which happens with historical readings is we try to understand history from today's perspectives. So that's a challenge for a history student as well as a history writer. Narayanrao was a teenager when he took this tremendous responsibility, not only from the perspective of state and its authority which fell upon him, but as you rightly said, it's three generations.
So was Madhavrao.
Yeah, exactly. So that's 3 generations prior to that. But the teenagers of 18th century or the earlier time period are very different from the teenagers of our today's context. They have been trained, they have been groomed to take over these responsibilities in governance and different administrative structures from their early ages. And that's what happened with Bajirao, that's what happened with Nana Sahib. And the same thing, Madhavrao was in a way grooming up the personality towards the ending part of his career, that perhaps it's Narayanrao who will be taking it forward. Now, Narayanrao's a reference which came earlier, it's the same wordings that Narayanrao used to refer to Raghoba, ki he rajya tumcha's ahe. That's exactly what Madhavrao had said about a decade back. But the way Madhavrao tackled his uncle and the way Narayanrao tackled it was diametrically opposite. The tact, the diplomacy, which could be seen in the earlier Peshwas, it was somewhere missing. Now, though most of them had become Peshwas at a very young age, something perhaps a college student today will not be able to understand as well, that at the age of 16, 18, 20, this tremendous responsibility being bestowed upon them. But the tact and diplomacy that was shown by the earlier ones was not visible clearly in Narayanrao's time period. The high-handed behavior towards his uncle, the harsh imprisonment terms which came about, नजर कैदेत ज्या पद्धतीत ठेवलं गेलं and the restrictions that were imposed. Again, there were so many complexities at play. Taking care of the numerous confederate units, you have so many other rajas, centers of power that had to be accommodated. Wars of successions, disputed successions was the norm of the feudal system. So again, ensuring that the Peshwa's office becomes an impartial arbitrator in this power struggle. Now, all these things required immense tact, immense diplomacy, something that was not there in comparative terms to the earlier Peshwas in Narayanrao. So that became a challenge. And more importantly, again, we are talking about an 18th century society. Like Pawar Sahib mentioned a few minutes back, even our today's society is plagued by caste dynamics. 18th century was a far more conservative and far more orthodox social system. So caste dynamics also played an extremely important role. You have, I would agree with Professor Apte that you have a wonderful appendix section which is there towards the end of the book. And you have the declaration which the Prabhu community had to sign. It's an extremely humiliating declaration which is there. So you have so many factors coming together. So from the centripetal tendencies which led to the creation of the Maratha Swarajya, to eventually these tendencies moving outside from the center, and Narayanrao at the helm of affairs not being able to deal with it in an effective manner.
So there's, would you call it more arrogance or more naivety, or both?
I think the role of a historian, I have always been taught, is that of a lawyer passionately arguing his case and not judging anyone as arrogant or otherwise. But it is a mixture of all these factors. You have arrogance to a certain extent because once you occupy a certain place of authority within the structure, arrogance, I think, follows, obviously, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, as the saying goes. So arrogance is there. You have naivety again. Now, but you cannot blame it that he was naive entirely, in the sense that Madhavrao again was not trained to take up that position. That was Vishwasrao. But Madhavrao dealt with it wonderfully. He had a steep learning curve. The same thing was there with Narayanrao. But you have different persons, taking things differently.
So one more question on that, and that's something that Dr. Kulkarni has briefly described in the book, was the impression that was created on his mind, or the way he was molded by his mother. What impact did she have on? Did she exasperate the conflict between the uncle and the nephew, or what role did she play? I think it's mentioned in the book.
Right. Now, it's a very complicated story again. Now, this is a fascinating thing again about. I've been put on that difficult spot by him. So it's a.
Sitting in the center, so I will ask you the most difficult questions.
It's a difficult situation in the sense that this tremendous loyalty which is shown by the Peshwa women towards their husbands, and that has been marked out by Dr. Kulkarni as well. So even if perhaps they felt that this is wrong or this is right, whatever the assumptions were, they stood steadfast. They believed that this is something that has to be done. And there's not just the wife or the mother giving numerous pieces of advice. There are numerous advices coming from many counselors as well. Nana Sahib had to obviously consult her. Gopikabai also obviously had a tremendous role in the initial part of Madhavrao's career. But an independent mind is something that was lacking a bit perhaps in Narayanrao in comparison to his elder brother Madhavrao or even Nana Sahib Peshwa earlier. So taking the advice, but at the same time believing about what to do and what not to do. That's something which is important. So it's not just what kind of influence or what kind of advice he was receiving. So the Nashik visit, which paved the way to the developments which happened eventually in Pune. So it's not just about who is giving advice or what kind of authority that person has over the Peshwa, but to what extent should we listen to the advice is equally important. So that sets Narayanrao apart from the earlier Peshwas.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned, the role of the wives, the mothers, the aunts. That's not very often discussed, and I did find references in this book as well as some of the previous books of Dr. Kulkarni. One point, I forgot which book, but it's worth mentioning that there is a list in one of your books that talk about the library request from whether it's Gopika Bai or someone else, and like some 500 books from Ramayana, Mahabharata, and they had asked for handwritten copy. Obviously, there was no printing press, so they were quite well read, many of them, and they were studying quite a bit. So that is another interesting point that I remember. Professor Apte, when I learned that you are going to be part of the panel, I was actually very happy because I thought I'll ask some questions which are a little unrelated to some of these things that I've always wanted to find out. And I've asked these questions to Dr. Kulkarni as well. But you are probably the best person to answer these. So let me step back a little bit from the specific episode of Narayanrao and Raghoba, and talk about that era. And we are in 1770s India, 1770s Pune. As an economics guru, I really want to understand. Pune by that time had spent a few decades as one of the as a de facto capital or one of the most important cities of the country. How would you describe Pune society and Pune economy and Pune wealth of that era? That's something that I have struggled myself to understand, and I can't think of any other better person than you to talk about some of that 18th century economy of this era.
Very diffuse picture, therefore you will get a diffused answer. Pune was not a very big town to begin with. In fact, the towns in those times usually used to flourish as a part of being a military center. These were the history of most of the towns. For example, probably in the 15th century or even beginning of 16th, 17th century, Bagalan would be as comparably big as Pune, because the kind of military activity it had of the Mughals. Of course, it started gaining importance. The population started growing. People started migrating because it was a seat of power. And where there is a military and a seat of power, there are a variety of markets start emerging. Because even for the maintenance of military itself, you require so many kinds of craftsmen. If you look at the way in which Pune has evolved, it used to be called a kasbah, which also meant, in fact, a kind of a city. But the specific lens that you are often, even now we say that Tambatali, all these are these typical symptoms, or at the very close to the river, there is a Kumbarali, Kumbar Vase as it was called. So that sort of a growth of Pune did occur, but it is quite different from the Pune as we see in the 19th century, because 19th century records of Pune are more amply available than the 18th century. It is Avinash Soni who has in fact written an excellent book on Pune, which sketches how the thing changed. For example, one rivulet kind of Ambiloda, that used to flow in a very different direction. It had to be artificially changed and altered. So all those so-called bags, Natu Bag, etc. that you get, they were not available for the residential premises. It was only in the later period they became the places where the residential population could grow. So Pune was a growing center, obviously, but probably the volume of trade was not that high as it could be, for example, in case of Surat or in case of Mumbai, obviously because it was a port activity. They had factories there. So naturally, the nature of growth that you will get in such centers is remarkably different from that of Pune.
Yeah, I think it's one of my requests for Dr. Kulkarni, for one of maybe a lateral book at some point of time, is talk more about some of these economic and sociology aspects of that era, because many times our history we talk about, chronological battles and successions, but we don't talk as much. You wanted to
I'll add, there are, in fact, again, this is the line of research which we have lost in between.
And your favorite food habits of that?
In fact, there is one very important class which is often relatively neglected. The people who used to finance the maintenance of military and the warfare. And these were very different kinds of moneylenders. They were not necessarily of one community or a caste elevage. They had different capacities, they had different trade routes under their command, as a result of which their ability to serve either the finances or the goods to be procured was different, but nonetheless they were very important. This was way back in 1950s. Dhananjay-Rao Gadgil wrote on Nagar Shet and Mahajans in Pune. These Nagar Shet and Mahajans were in fact the principal supporters for a variety of financial facilitation that were needed across different places in the kingdom or also during the course of war. But you get much better record of this in the Mughal region rather than you will get it here. Perhaps they are there, but we have not yet seen it. That's why I mentioned that there are so many papers which need to be seen and examined, which are yet not been seen.
Dr. Kulkarni, your comment on this, I was going to ask you a next question, but you were going to comment on this.
Yeah, actually, economics is a very interesting subject because that gives you the heart of how the empire functioned actually. Because without money, today the finance bill is the most important document. So without that economy, but I'm not an economist. I'm a surgeon actually, who is straight into history. So and to stray into economics, I don't have that long time left now. But I'll tell you one more thing, a practical aspect, that if I write a book on economics of the Marathas of that period, I would like to find sufficient number of readers for that subject, because except for academicians and students, I don't know who's interested in that. I mean, Kedar has written a book on economy of the Maratha Empire recently. Very beautifully created book. But the readers have to be available for what you want. You have to look at the target audience ultimately when you're saying something.
No, I fully agree, but having Professor Apte here, I couldn't resist getting into this topic. So let's come back to the main history and the main topics in this book. Obviously, one of the most central characters or groups, or group of a character that's there in this book early on are the Gardis. And many people even today don't really understand who they were, how were they created, why were they created, what role would they function, and did that role change after what happened 251 years ago yesterday? So can you talk about that, including many people don't even know the origin of the word?
Actually, in the 175 years span of the Maratha kingdom, you'll find that type of warfare kept changing. In the 17th century, the forts were very important. In the 18th century, forts were meant for keeping either the treasury or for putting prisoners there. So why was this change there? Because, like I have said this before, in the armed forces, in the Navy, we have something called a principle of denial of the sea by using submarines. A weaker power, which cannot hold the sea, uses submarines. A stronger power uses aircraft carriers to hold the ground. So in the 18th century, Maratha armies could come on the field and hold ground. So the importance of forts was, while earlier from the forts were the main defensive positions from where you could come down, attack your enemy and go back to the fort. So this method of warfare kept changing. Then cavalry came in a very big way from the earlier Mavalas and infantry. Suddenly you find a change, cavalry comes in. And every Maratha soldier wants to be a cavalryman. He's not interested in anything else. The muskets those days were very slow to fire. And the first French victory I remember in 1746, which they won against the Nawab of Arcot, was because they had recently brought guns which could fire before the cavalry charge reached the guns. So when that happened, that change started taking place. And the Marathas experienced this in the 1750s when Bussy joined the Nizam. He practically took over the empire of the Nizam, and the Marathas had to face the French artillery. And these French trained gunmen who were there, they were disciples of Bussy. They were called Gardis after the French word garde. So from garde they became Gardis, and we started calling them Gardis. Now, when Nana Sahib Peshwa and Bhau Sahib Peshwa realized the importance of the Gardis, that if you have to defeat the Nizam, you need an artillery of your own. There was no time to develop an artillery of your own, so they directly bought, like we are doing even today, directly imported the weapons, imported the men, and these men came into the Maratha army as they were the Gardis. They brought their own guns, they brought their own men, and
they like mercenaries.
They were mercenaries. I mean, Ibrahim Khan Gardi fights for the Nizam one day, the next day he takes salary and joins the Marathas and fights for them. But he fought to the death. He did not kind of give up. They were very particular about being paid on time also. Unlike the rest of the people who always were in arrears, the Gardis wanted their pay on time, and they were paid much more than all the other components of the Maratha army. So that was the role of the Gardis. Now Gardis, these were very trusted men. Sumer Singh Gardi has been with the Marathas from 1757. He was recruited at that time. So 15 years he was there. And he was probably put on guard to guard Raghoba Dada when he was in Nazar Qaid inside the Shashanivar Vada. So they were trusted. And it was the lure of, but they had no fixed national spirit in favor of the Marathas because they were ultimately mercenaries. So they could be bought for whatever. If they find somebody else is becoming the power center, they can easily change sides.
Right, but that word Gardi became a descriptor. So, later on you have a lot of locals who they were not necessarily French, but they were called Gardis.
You find very surprising that when the English attacked Salsette, or Sashti as it is called, there is a letter which says, आत्ता 200 गार्दी असते तर ह्यांना आपण अद्दल घडवली असती. So they were missing the Gardis at that time to face the English. So Gardis remained in the Maratha thing for.
So they clearly played a very important role in this whole episode. I would also like to thank you for the detailed map and the analysis that you have done about the path that Narayanrao took when he was running away, and that whole description. I think readers should definitely read that to see the level of complexity and. I mean, it really reads differently from a typical history book. I mean, even though you know the ending, it's still very interesting to read that whole gruesome period, I guess. So let me ask you this: was there a letter for the Tuma, or you'll have to read the book for that?
No, it has been printed in the past also. The letter was very much there. There's no doubt about that. The letter was there. Today we can't trace it where it is gone, because it was mentioned by Grand Duff that such a letter existed, and again Anandibai herself mentions it, as I've given in this book. Ki dhasama kuni kela hi chaukashi ka nahi keli. She mentions it. That is there in one of the
defense. She herself brings that up later on.
So in that way she brings out that I am innocent. I have never done this, and I have been given a म्हणजे साप म्हणून काठी जमिनीवर मारण्यापेक्षा माझ्या पदरामध्ये पुराव्याचं माप टाका. That's what she says. That's what her sentence is. So that proof was never found, and who did it was never found at that time.
But that became one of the most famous letters and line in Marathi history, and even in Marathi popular culture because of that. So let's move on a little bit further because once the assassination is done, the rest of the book is obviously covering a lot of ground in terms of the journey of Raghoba and essentially, his early attempts to seize power, and then how it failed, and then the Barbai Karastan and so on. So there's a lot of interesting chronological things that happen in rapid succession. So let's start at the beginning part of that. Immediately after the assassination, and when Pune was in a state of shock, all the other chiefs who were there were in a state of shock. So no one quite expected what was going on and what had happened. What do you think? How do you think Raghoba reacted immediately after that? Even he wasn't fully prepared for that. And how did he try to consolidate his power at that point of time? And could he have done anything differently in those first few days where things may have been a little different from what eventually ended up happening?
Again, we have the hindsight of history to make comments on these developments as to whether Raghoba, what he did was right or wrong, or what was his decision-making process about. Now, Raghoba is undoubtedly the central character in this entire plot, and it's properly titled as Raghoba. So the assassination happens midway, and the journey still continues in the book. Now, Raghoba is a fascinating character right from his early time period of 1750s, late 1750s, when he takes over the leadership of the North Indian campaign. And in fact, a fascinating aspect that came about reading in this book and the earlier letters as well in the earlier books is the nomenclature. I'm just deviating from the subject right now. It's about the nomenclature in the sense we refer as to what we should call our country has been a debate, a discussion, perhaps a controversy in the past few months. And it was interesting to note that you have the word Hindustan, which is constantly refer to the north and central region. North of Narmada. And Narmada, how it is seen as a dividing line. And you have, Dakhan and other terminologies or Desh which come to refer to the land south of Narmada. So his campaigns in Hindustan, so the journey essentially begins from there. And you have so many complexities. And Raghoba Dada is also associated with another development that links it to the finance aspects, from charges of embezzlement for funds and misappropriation, excessive spending and so on. These were many of these allegations which were put right from his early North Indian campaigns. So that really complicates the matters, and the economic study of the Maratha time period, of this time period, is extremely important from that perspective as well, as to you have the constant indebtedness which was there of the Peshwa system. Constant was again being obviously one of the factors, so the war finance aspect. And the Gardis had such an upper hand into the tumultuous days of August and early September, in the sense that you have him being virtually a prisoner also for the first few days after the event takes place. Now, this was perhaps
weird.
a surprise.
In a way, he had ordered it, but in a way, he was still a prisoner. So it was quite complex.
Yeah, and it was a very complex emotional ride for him as well. He's hurt in the process when Narayanrao is being murdered at his feet. So there is a person who is tremendously conflicted internally, that he wants power, but he wants no harm to be done to Narayanrao. But he understands as long as Narayanrao is there, his position is not going to be stable. And at the same time, he is dependent on the Gardis, but he does not trust them eventually. So there are many conflicting positions which happen. And perhaps again, what he should have done or how he handled things, because again, you do have the security of the Maratha state, which was something that was in his mind. He goes out on a campaign. It can be argued with, again, a historical hindsight of more than 2.5 centuries that he should have consolidated his position within Pune first before he got out on the campaigns against the Nizam and against other forces. But again, that's the benefit of hindsight.
That's hindsight. So again, this is a very complex area, so you should read the book to understand exactly what all happened there. Professor Apte, just extending that, an important character who comes in briefly in the book, but who was important for this particular film clip that we saw, was none other than Ram Shastri. Can you briefly talk about him and his role in this period? Is it overemphasized because of movies like these, or underemphasized because it's not written actively elsewhere? And how was he as a person, and what did he eventually end up accomplishing?
No, I don't think it is the films which invented it. It was a part of the functioning of the system in those times. It was referred to Ram Shastri, and Ram Shastri, in fact, Suomoto said that I know what it is. He, in fact, there are Bakhar references to what exchange took place between him and Raghoba, and said that if this is the case, I am not any more interested in being a part of this kingdom. I will leave and I will go back to my home, Mauli. So I don't think it is entirely, and there was a system of what we now call as judiciary, which was pretty well functioning. And in fact, there are some studies which have done what kind of disputes typically came and what the judges were required to judge about. So it is not entirely an fiction, or it is not really out of proportion. But of course, in the film, that being made a central character, Gajanarao Jagirdar being playing it, it became even more popular. Yeah. But that is something which was inevitable. And had that not been inevitable, then probably some kind of a coup which was later made, which is now called as Barbai, that would not have been possible, because it was recognized as a crime. Whosoever has committed it.
So Barbai's got the legal foundation to do what they did. You know?
Yeah, because it was a part of the process.
Similarly, can you briefly talk about how, we'll get into Barbai in more detail, but how were the two main characters of Barbai? You know, Nana Fadnavis, who later on plays a very important role, and I'm looking forward to Dr. Kulkarni's next 2-3 books where we'll learn a lot more about him. But this is where he makes his early appearance, and Sakharam Bapu. How would you describe them and their role early on?
No, the kinds of factions which were earlier there, I think they were well recognized and well defined in those times. Who was siding with whom was more or less known, and that was not a secret. Only problem was what kind of a truce could be reached. That was something what was often negotiated very frequently, most of the time unsuccessfully. Even Raghoba himself tried to have that kind of a truce, sometimes even involving Ingrats. But that did not necessarily work because he had taken such a drastic step, and it's not true that Narayanrao didn't have a judgment of it. This story is way back in Madhurao's time. Imprisonment also started with Madhurao. So as a character, as a kind of a potential deviation-based threat that he can have, was a well-known thing. And that was one of the reasons why such kind of a articulation of forces that happened in a relatively short period of time. Otherwise, that would not have happened.
So, Dr. Kulkarni, let me ask you the same question. Raghoba ultimately is the center character of the book, even though it starts with the assassination. And clearly, he was one of the most complex characters of the 18th century Maratha history. We've just talked about some of them, but I would like to hear again your insights on how would you describe him as a person? Because it's very difficult to come up with one, two, even few words to really describe him. He is a man of contradictions all over.
You can roughly divide his life into two parts. The first part was as long as Nanasaheb Peshwa was alive. And Nanasaheb Peshwa being much older than him, by good about 13, 14 years, he was practically like a guardian who covered up most of Raghoba's, suppose he made some mistakes, he covered up for them. And if he spent some money, he paid up for them. And so till 1761, you find a very successful Raghoba. He captures Ahmedabad in his first campaign, 1753. 1753 to 1755, he goes on a big campaign in the north, goes to Delhi, replaces the emperor, captures Delhi, comes back. In 1757, he again, Abdali has come that time, he goes back. 1758, he is invited into the Punjab. There was no plan to go there. He is invited into the Punjab and defeats Jahan Khan and Taimur, takes Lahore, sends his men to Attock, Multan, Peshawar. So that is a successful period. And you find that time he had a very eminent person by his side. That was Mallarao Holkar, who was trained and who had worked with Bajirao. And when Mallarao Holkar said something, Raghoba had to listen to him because he was far, far junior in the army, though he was named as the commander. So that was one phase of his life. But when his father died, when Sadashirao Bhau died, when Vishwasrao died at Panipat, probably awakening of ambition, though the trend was the eldest son becomes the next Peshwa. And this young boy, Madhurao, is just 16 years of age. How can you make him the Peshwa? I'm more responsible. I should become the... So that started in 1761. And one cannot dismiss it, that it was not a valid expectation of this man. And therefore, first 3 years, he acted like kind of a guardian, sometimes even overbearing in his manners towards Madhurao, who was himself a very proud person. And his mother was there to guide him, that you cannot just submit to your uncle like this. And therefore, after Rakshas Bhavan, you find that Madhurao not only takes over from Raghoba, but he stops listening to his mother also. And she goes back to Nashik in 1764 and doesn't come back to Pune after that for the remaining 20 years of her life. So you find this Madhurao finally comes into his own, and he's a strong personality. He's almost 20 years of age at that time. Narayanrao never got this chance, if you look at it from his point. By that time, Raghoba had realized what had happened in the Madhurao regime, and he probably decided he must act quickly. Of course, he was not the doer also of the plot. The plot came to him, I would say. It was brought to him. Here is a plot, we want to make you the Peshwa. And then again this thing started. Now, he was not known to take advice from the proper advisors. He was suspicious of them. Because several times he had found people changing sides, this fellow going that side, this fellow. So he was very suspicious of the official advisors of the ministers of the... He depended on the Shagirds. Because the Shagirds were dependent on his patronage, he said that these people are bound to give me correct advice. So that was one thing. And of course, the people of that time were superstitious. He was probably a little more superstitious than what the rest of the people were. But And of course, this I think in Maratha history we always exaggerate this whole thing of having concubines and this thing. Well, if you go to Mandu, you find a palace with 50, 100 concubines and so on. Here, 5 or 6 concubines, and you make a big thing, Natak Shala. 7 Natak Shala? Kai hai? So I think
the Mughals probably had 700.
We probably overdo it a little bit because our dusra lagna kela, that kind of thing. I think we have to grow out of that now. So.
And as Professor Apte said, we can't, or Professor Gadgil said, we can't equate everything from our present viewpoint into what was going on 300 years back.
Once the ambition is awakened, and he has made it public that I want to be the Peshwa, he had to follow it up. And he did it 2, 3, 4 times unsuccessfully. And finally, he plays his, as I say, he plays his card.
So, yes, very, very complex character. But I guess let's move on further to Barbai. I mean, same question to you, Professor Gadgil. The Barbai themselves were also quite an interesting group. And as Dr. Kulkarni, in one of his shorter stories in the Maratha Century, has talked about the Sade Teen Shahane, 2 of them prominently being Nana Fadnavis and Sakharam Bapu. Can you talk a bit about them and their early role, even before the full-fledged Karastan broke out much later?
No, Sakharam Bapu perhaps is the central character into the developments as they play out. And Nana Fadnavis eventually grows in stature as time proceeds, and he has that longevity dominating the affairs for the next 2.5 decades. Now, the 2 of them were not on the best of the terms when
Sakharam
all these
Bapu
developments...
also is very conflicted early on.
Exactly. So it's Sakharam Bapu had not appreciated the way Narayanrao's functioning was taking place as the Peshwa. Similarly, you have Nana Fadnavis, who is also not happy with the entire functioning, but still continues because he is the advisor. But he gives advice only when it is seeked, as it is rightly mentioned. So you have a very different situation, but at the same time, as was rightly pointed out by Professor Apte, that they believe that a wrong has been committed. So it's that moral aspect that a wrong has been committed and we have to make things right to the best of our abilities, which get these ministers together into forming the Barbai Mandali. Now, again, it's not a homogeneous group in its entirety. There are multiple tendencies, but that is how you have the factional politics again playing out. Now, it's not a different story in the Mughal court or in any other rulers, Nawabs or Nizam's court. So factions, and within that factionalism is an integral component which continues. So it's the same thing. But nonetheless, there is a common purpose which binds them. Now, Sakharam Bapu obviously is the central character. He is the one who is issuing advices. But at the same time, within this Barbai Mandal and the ministerial party taking charge, there is again a conflict within the confederate units. Because the flight of Raghoba when it happens and the role which is played by the Holkar and the Sindhia also comes into picture. That you do not have the acceptance of the authority which is entirely felt. But again, there are efforts to do that. You have eventually Nana Fadnavis, who had not ventured out on military campaigns after 1761, decides that yes, they have to move out of Purandar and Pune. If Raghoba has to be dealt with. So there are numerous conflicts. There are again internal differences, but it's the common aspect which keeps them united, that correcting the wrong.
So same continuing that thread with Professor Apte. Once Raghoba stepped out and the Barbais started coalescing around what was morally right or ethically right or legally right of how did, another complex thing that we see there is how different chiefs, whether it was the Holkar or Shindes, whether it was the Gaikwads, the Bhosles, and even closer, what were their thought processes and how did they align or not align with one or the 2 sides? Because there were clearly 2 camps that had emerged by that time, Raghoba and Barbai.
See, the problem is endemic to almost all regimes in those times. As Dr. Kelkar is here, I'm tempted to call it the usual problem of the center versus states. So, the confederacy is not very easy to maintain because the basis and the principles on which the alliances are forged they can probably wither away very quickly sometimes because of even personal conflicts, as it happened in case of Holkar's. So maintaining a confederacy was tension by itself for the members of the confederacy itself. So I think this is common among all the regimes in those times because it's a very vast territory. Very diverse kinds of territories to assign it as powers. Again, in terms of the kind of revenue which will be typically expected of them to actually collect, because what was given as a target and what was actually a performance, there used to be often a very big yawning gap. That often used to be, in fact, a source of skirmish, conflict, tension among the so-called state satraps as against the central power, which Peshwa had become for a while. So, but nonetheless, some of them did have an interest. And in fact, this is something which is an endemic and common problem in Indian history, though it is not often portrayed in that way. In Mahabharata, that is also a problem of confederacy. It is all the design of Krishna who tries to eliminate his rivals. And one by taking sides in the entire unfolding of the events. Same kind of a thing was also going to happen there eventually. It did occur because this event triggered that too much early, than it could have in fact stabilized. So it's very difficult to say what confederacy would have survived better or performed better.
Right. So I think we have about 10, 15 more minutes. So there are two important things that I haven't touched upon that I definitely want to cover. One is an important character in the second half of the book who's not that well known. Again, you have written about it about him in the Maratha century, but his role, his importance, what he tried to achieve in terms of catching up with Raghoba is not very well known. So I would like you to briefly talk about Haripant Phadke and his background and his role and why is he so important especially in the second half of the book.
Haripant Phadke is the uncelebrated captain of the Maratha army, especially from 1760 till his death in 1794. He led every army and he started as a clerk.
34 years.
34 years. And he started as a clerk in the Phad. I mean, he was fiercely loyal to Nana Patnis. And Nana Patnis could rely on Haripant Phadke that he will definitely do what he is told and he will be completely loyal to him. And in this particular book, Trimbakrao Pethe was the senior most general at that time. And Trimbakrao Pethe was the first one to kind of confront Raghoba at that time. But after Trimbakrao Pethe, you find that when the news reaches Purandar that a catastrophe has occurred, the question asked is, but is Haripant there? If Haripant is there, don't worry. So Haripant takes the battle forwards from there onwards, assisted by Vamanrao Patwardhan. So Vamanrao Patwardhan, another role which is underplayed, but he is there every time and again very fiercely loyal to the ministerial party or the Barabai as they came to be called later on. And I've got another feeling that this whole thing arose, this entire revolt against Raghoba arose because of a exaggerated or heightened sense of morality which prevailed among some of the members of the Barabai. Primarily, I would say that it was Nana Patnis who would not compromise that a murder has taken place and the culprits must be brought to book. And the last two chapters I have described the various methods in which they were brought. But this was a person who would not morally and ethically compromise, and whatever may be the political consequences of that, he was prepared to face. And that probably was the move behind this whole thing. Otherwise, it was very easy to accept Raghoba as the Peshwa. Let him continue ruling. Stability politically would have continued. Success or otherwise on the battlefield was different. But even Sakaram Bapu, he was always in two minds. But Nana Fadnis was very clear about that this has to be punished. And he went, I mean, even later on, in his later life, you find that was the Nana Sahib Peshwa's Vansh. And his loyalty to Nana Sahib Peshwa's Vansh was what tells the story of the remaining
Yeah, so I
40
think,
years.
I don't want to jump to that because I'm expecting 2 more books from you on that, because this stops at 1775 and most of Nana Fadnavis's career or effective career is after that. But just one word on Haripan Phadke. I think in spite of all his importance, he almost caught up with Raghoba, but he failed. Again, one of those history ifs and buts. He was within just 5 miles or 10 miles away, but Raghoba escaped.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it for the book, but there are factors which were telling him that don't cross the Narmada, don't cross the Tapi. So if he had crossed it, he would have come into confrontation with his own people. So he had to stop there, though he didn't want to stop.
Yeah, it's very interesting you mentioned Mahabharata, because this particular conflict, because there were 2 sides and issues of legality, morals, there's so many internal conflicts between the same players. I mean, who is the enemy and who is not, and do I want to fight my own people? And that kind of dilemma is presented at so many points of time in this book, which didn't happen before. It was more straightforward. Professor Gadgil, one thing that we haven't talked about, but the biggest beneficiaries of this whole episode, what happened, were the Topikars, were the English. And they managed to steal Sashti, what we call, or Salset, which is essentially everything north of Bandra all the way to Thane. So can you talk about that period and the role of English in that, how they managed to steal and how they tried to consolidate their position?
It's not the English only. English became the primary benefactors because eventually they rose as the paramount power by the 19th century. It's the same thing which was happening in the south. So you have Hyder Ali also wanting to make gains because of the internal chaos and civil war kind of situation which was there within the Maratha camp. And it was perfectly obvious that the English would want to make for the best situation for themselves. Now, Salset is a very interesting story, the way it happens, because it's not just the Marathas or the English who are the principal actors in this. You also have the role of the Portuguese.
Who controlled it
for a very long time, and it's actually it goes back right into the dowry that was given and the differences again between the state and the center. So you have the governments deciding in Lisbon and London that this is how the arrangement will be made, but you have the Bombay-based Portuguese not willing to give up locations, and Salset, Thana, etc. They remained with the Portuguese before the Marathas eventually took it under their control, and the British were upset with the developments which had happened, and they wanted this region in order to ensure that Bombay as a harbour, as a city centre survives, and it was a strategic move to take over this region. But what is more fascinating, and this is something which is again often forgotten, so you have so many linkages between local, regional, and at the same time national histories which are taking place, and also international ones. So 1773 is the time period when the Regulating Act had come in, when you have the relations of these 3 presidencies which had changed dynamically. And this is commented upon in the book as well. So you have Calcutta and the Governor General of Bengal, based in Calcutta, who was given overarching powers over Bombay as well as Madras, and how Bombay and Madras again were not happy with the developments. Again, the Bombay government felt that they had not gained significantly in comparison to Calcutta and Madras, and this was an opportunity which should not be let off. We're talking again about the 18th century, so the means of communication, the modes of communication were far more outdated, far more slower than they are in today's time. Again, a link, unfortunately, which obviously comes between the past and present in comparison. So they were slower, so taking maximum benefits of these slow correspondences, they ensured that Shashti is taken over. But the gallant defense that was put up by the contingent under Narayanrao is something which is noteworthy in this entire aspect. The Thana fort would have surrendered, again, ifs and buts, but the way you have it being defended so long with so scant resources and no reinforcements coming in, because you have the Purandar government, the ministerial party, which was again engaged in a lot many things. So you have the rise of the English which begins here, but at the same time you also have Hornby and others who are establishing links with Raghoba, when he's moving in other parts of Western India. So it's all these developments which are taking place simultaneously. So it's not entirely right to blame the English for capitalizing on it.
Of course, I mean, they cashed in. But I think Dr. Kulkarni recently clarified on Twitter last week, I think, because this question comes up and many people don't realize that at least for a few decades after Chimaji Appa captured Vasai from the Portuguese till about late 1770s, Shashti, which is essentially all of suburban Mumbai, was part of the Maratha Empire. So when people say that, Marathas were never in Mumbai, that's incorrect. I mean, they controlled vast parts of Mumbai for a short period of time till again it went to the English. So Dr. Kulkarni, maybe we'll take 2-3 quick questions from the audience. A sincere request, very short questions so that we can cover more and less comment.
If I could just add on to the Shashti aspect.
Yeah.
Again, how you have the present and the past interlinked in the sense that Shashti was considered outside the British, Bombay and so on. So you have the same round. So Worli ke aage you have Bandra which comes, for example. Or Sion, which is called as Shiv. Shiv literally means a boundary. Essentially you have those stops which were there. So this is still considered today in the sense, I don't know how many, I'm sure many of you must have traveled to Mumbai. So auto rickshaws won't go beyond these points into South Mumbai. Again, Thane was considered different. It's on the same island actually, after it has been unified altogether after reclamations. But it was considered as a different administrative unit. And even with reinforcements coming to the narrow creek side on the Thane where the fort is situated, they could not cross. So it's something which is all bewildering to a great extent.
Affecting the geography and politics today as well. Quick questions. Anyone? Yogesh, quick one.
So quick one. What was the Barbai plan if Narayanrao's wife had given birth to a girl at Puranjap?
I think Dr. Kulkarni has briefly mentioned that in the book.
Thomas Mostyn, who was the British resident in Pune at that time, he has written that 5 different pregnant ladies were taken to Purandar at that time. So in case a daughter is born and some other one gives a son, gives birth to a son, he'll be adopted. It didn't happen eventually because Nana Fadnis had preempted that. What he did is he said that I want an independent person to come and oversee who is giving birth and the boy is born. So he wrote to Chhatrapati Ram Raja that please send 2 women and the people who will come and verify that the boy who is born to Gangabai only and nobody else. So that was an independent referee to make sure that the boy who is born is to Gangabai and not anybody else. So luckily it was a boy, and from the beginning they said if it was a boy then it is all the problems are solved. But if it was not, luckily they never had to address that problem. But Thomas Mostyn says that 5 women were taken there and so on.
Anyone there? Quick, sir.
राघवांवर अन्याय झाला ना जसं पाहायला गेलं तर अटक पार केली होती. सेकंड पानिपतला जर त्यांना पाठवलं असतं तर पानिपत झालं.
Yeah, I think this question is asked by everyone. I didn't ask it because it's covered everywhere, but Dr. Kulkarni, you have to touch upon that.
$1 million question. Actually, Raghoba Dada, when he came back from Attak, he brought a debt of 80 lakh rupees. So he was asked, you go for this to earn money or to lose it? And he came back with 80 lakh rupees. And then Sadashirao Bhavu, who was the Diwan, Nana Sahib Peshwa's time, he questioned him. What is this? It's inefficiency on your part that you come back with such a big debt to the kingdom. So then within the family they had a discussion for a week at Padtur, and it was then decided that instead of Raghoba this time Sadashirao Bhavu will go because he had just won a famous victory against the Nizam in the south. He had used the artillery of Ibrahim Khan Gardi very efficiently. And there were letters from the north. There was a Maratha agent called Raja Keshavda. So he had written to the एक मोठी army पाठवा, send with तोपखाना. हा अब्दाली जो असा माणूस आहे की यू कॅनॉट जस्ट गो विथ अ नॉर्मल आर्मी, मोठा तोफखाना पाठवा आणि जंगीत सैन्य पाठवा तरच हा जाईल. नाही तर हा प्रदीर्घ रोग आहे लागलेला, कारण दॅट वॉज अब्दालीज 5th invasion. Now what happened in 1757-58 when Abdali had come there, had committed a massacre in Delhi, massacre in Mathura, Vrindavan. Raghoba was near Indore. Mallara Holkar was in Rajasthan. And they did not really bring together the army and chase him out. They waited for him to leave India and go away. And then they came back and took back Delhi, and then they went to Punjab and they were successful there. Now the argument is not that whether Raghoba would have been more successful. The argument even put is, let him go, then we could have gone and taken on. How many days will Abdali stay here? So this had been already practiced earlier. And there was time when this Pradirga Rog, which was affecting us, had to be taken head on at some point in time. And only a person as adamant and as assertive and as, I would say, strong as Sadashirao Bhau in his personality could have taken on this responsibility at that time. What happens in battle is a different issue. In fact, the Marathas came within an inch of winning the battle.
Yeah, I think for that you have to read the first book of Dr. Kulkarni.
Sure.
Here, quick. Sorry. Yeah.
ब्राह्मण वर्सेस मराठा याची जो कलह आहे हा पेशवाई काळापासून सुरू झाला का?
आता जाती जातींमध्ये आपण पहिल्यापासून वाटले गेलेलो आहोत ना, त्यामुळे तिथून सुरू झाला का नाही मला माहित नाही. शिवाजी महाराजांनी सगळ्यांना एकत्र आणलं होतं. पुढे कुठे सुरू झाला आणि काय नाही, ब्राह्मणांमध्ये जो पोट जातींमध्ये किती भांडण होत त्यावेळेला. सो दॅट वॉज अ ट्रॅजेडी.
तुम्ही जर न्यायव्यवस्थेमध्ये आलेले कज्जे बघितले तर सर्वात जास्त कज्जा ब्राह्मण विरुद्ध चांद्रसेनीय कायस्थ प्रभू असा दिसतो.
या पुस्तकात त्याच्यावर दिलेलं आहे. He was completely against Raghoba for having committed this act. And in fact, he was already annoyed with Raghoba because after the murder, Raghoba made a seal in which he did not use his name, he used Shahu Maharaj's name in his seal. So he said, "Yanni mala seal madhe pan yanni ghatlel nahi hai." So he was very furious about the whole thing, and he did not want Raghoba. The robes of office he had to compulsorily give when Amrutrao Peshwa went to collect it on his behalf of his father. But he was totally against giving it. Because he said, हे धर्माचं राज्य आहे, इथे अशा उद्योग चालणार नाहीत.
Okay, last, any quick question? Okay, I think we're pretty much done out of time. So last word for Professor Apte, Professor Gadgil, and then finally Dr. Kulkarni.
The book ends in the period which is full of many potential and many ambiguities. And the way in which these ambiguities finally resulted in the kind of history that we have got, it is for this purpose this book is actually important. Later period, it was characterized by, in fact, an intense tussle for power and conflict between Marathe and Ingraz. So much so that Nachikelkar's book is Marathe and Ingraz. And I would highly recommend the preface written by Vasudev Shastri Kare to this book, because it shows what many people have probably in mind, that what made these two kinds of armies and two kinds of societies so different. In fact, there is a famous remark which says, पाण्यात वाहत असताना मातीचे भांडे आणि लोखंडाचे भांडे आदळील तर कोण फुटेल हे सांगण्यासाठी ज्योतिषाची गरज नाही. So this is a state to which from this event onward the Maratha kingdom started degenerating. There is also a characteristic, namely when Shivaji founded the empire, which was very relatively in terms of geographic coverage very small, but it was very firm and very crystal clear about its aim, that it is to end the rule by the foreigners. The theme of that was getting diluted in variety of ways in different parts of India. But that started happening most poignantly and sharply in Peshwai after this event, partly probably overcolored by the nature of disputes that were there even among the Confederacy. So this period is a very important transition period, which probably is giving many portents of what is likely to happen and what may unfold. It is for this purpose that reading this transition is important. For example, you referred to the Calcutta governor considering himself to be strong. This was a problem for the British themselves, because the
factionalism as well.
In fact, he has expressed complete displeasure about getting into this problem of appointing someone, etc., etc. So those records, English records, in fact, show how indeterminate at that time and ambiguous about the unfolding of politics that the British themselves were. But as the situation progressed, it changed. And there are two things in the lighter vein I want to mention. You showed the clip. This Raghoba Anandibai is very heavily shadowed by the kind of plays that the playwrights in those times used to read. There is a heavy shadow of Macbeth, where Anandibai portrayed like Lady Macbeth. And there is also a shadow of Hamlet, because it is again the uncle and his nephew. And one more thing I would mention. When there was a play which I think Savai Rauzaransa Mrityu, which was portrayed, and that time, before that, there is this Narayanrao assassination. And the advertisement said that मरते समय पोटातून बाहेर पडलेला साखरभात दाखवला जाईल. So this is a very remarkable event. It stops at that, and what happens as a transition later is something which is British taking over. British were not really all that consolidated in this region as we like to believe. Bombay they got actually from Portuguese, and Portuguese had it for a long time. In fact, there was no one to occupy and rule because it was given to one medical practitioner called D. Garcia, who was the doctor of the Goa governor, and he died. He died here because he didn't want to go back to Portugal, because there was the so-called killing of Jews and all Christians that was being practiced in Portugal, and he has concealed that he is in fact a Jew. All his brothers, sisters were killed, and therefore he preferred not to go back to Goa and wait till the new Portuguese governor joins here. And therefore in the intermittent time he worked for the Nizam. So these are the kinds of peculiar complexities of those periods that one has to understand.
Quick last word.
So again, often in history, it's the transition period which is the least focused on. It's the dominant periods which are studied. So this is a transition period that has to be studied. I remember reading a wonderful introduction to a critique of the traditional Marxist approach and how necessary it was to move beyond Marxism, that is, how post-Marxist theory came about. This was, I think, in EPW. I can't remember the author right now. So he found a drunkard man searching for something on a street below a light. And this person goes and asks him where it is. He starts searching it. They are not successful. And he eventually asks the drunkard person, where did you lose your keys? So he says, in that corner of the street. And the writer asks, why are you searching here? Because there's light here. So what you have is that's the problem. So it's a transition. See, these time periods and epochs we have created for our own convenience. But when we talk about from ancient to medieval or from medieval to modern, these are the transitionary periods where there has been lesser focus. But in the recent times, obviously, that is changing. And in that sense, these books are a welcome addition to a literature that is developing on the middle and later part of 18th century of how this transition was taking place. In the future, obviously, there will be more books written on this transition, something that we are looking forward to. But at the same time, I would concur with the opinion that was shared earlier, that a book perhaps on the socio-cultural dynamics, how they were playing out in the 18th century. With economic aspects, yes, it's a lot of technical work, but the social culture, because there are traces of which come here and there in your books. But if we could have one specific volume on the socio-cultural history of the 18th century under the Maratha state, because it had grown socially heterogeneous from the Swarajya that was established about a century back. That is what transformed it into an empire. Empire is not something which is geographically huge. It's also something which is socially heterogeneous. So how to keep it together? What is the act that will bind different segments together? So this is something that, as a reader, we look forward to.
Dr. Kulkarni, your last word.
About Professor Gadgil's comments, I would say that the binding glue of the Maratha Confederacy was their philosophy of a Hindutva oriented, Hindutva is not a word coined at Hindu Padshah, you can say. So that principle remained. I mean, till the very end, in 1792, there's a letter by a Maratha Vakil in Hyderabad who says that the Mughals do a small thing and they blow it up and show as if it's a very big thing. Well, we do big things and we don't broadcast it or we don't tom-tom about it. So this was that main divide remained till the very end. About this book, I would say that this book actually, the question which he asked about Raghoba going to Panipat, when you read this book and you read the subsequent days, whatever is going to come after this, you feel that I wish Raghoba had gone to Panipat and Sadashivrao Bhau had stayed behind. And that would have definitely changed Maratha history. So on that note, I think I'll use that as the last.
I think that's a very interesting note. I think there's nothing left for me to summarize after that, except that do get the book. Dr. Kulkarni is here to sign it. You can also get it signed from him later. And I wish him all the best for the next 2 or 3 books to conclude this specific era and go up to 1802, 1803 till the Second Anglo-Maratha War. So thank you very much for coming on Sunday morning.
Thank you. That was a very interesting and insightful discussion. I now invite Dr. Kulkarni to propose a vote of thanks, and I request the audience just to be seated for a couple of minutes.
Before I come to the vote of thanks, I must felicitate Manjiri because she has done a wonderful job for all my book launches. And Manjiri, please. A vote of thanks is a pleasurable activity for the person who's taken all that help from everybody else. So I'll start with Padma Shri Pratap Rao sir. Dr. Bape is a very close friend of his, and it was through Dr. Bape that I could request him to come today. And I'm very grateful to him for spending a Sunday morning with us and giving us to Professor Apte. Of course, I've been attending so many of his talks in literature festivals and so on, and I've always been impressed by the way he puts across a point of view, whichever point of view it was. So there is a huge intellectual storehouse there, and any subject you give him, that subject is going to flower. And though he said in the beginning, ki mala kashala mika itihas nahi hai, but I knew that he's the right man for it, and therefore I decided to have him. Professor Gadgil, of course, he's a historian and he's a true historian. He doesn't have any biases, because I've had 3 talks with him in Bombay for 3 of my books in the Nehru Center, and I've observed the way he interacts with people. He does not like to be categorized into any camp. He is true to history for its own sake, and therefore he was a natural choice for having him here. So I'm grateful to all of them. Amit, of course, is a very old friend, and he has been kind of the engine behind my writing books. Because if I sit quietly for 2 months, he says, "Kutparant alay." So that question has to be answered. Ki nahi pehla chapter suru kela hai. Kai evdach ajun pude काय झाला. So that, he is the engine behind which he is pushing me forward to write my books. And I suppose that if the upper story remains intact, I might write a couple more. So that is as far as the chief guests who come here today, and a very eminent audience. I mean, I'm really, if I have to name, every row has got such eminent people sitting over here that I'm really, it's a privilege for me, it's a real honor for me to have so many people coming and attending this show. And I really thank them from the bottom of my heart. My friend Vidya has come from Bangalore and she has stayed back for a day. Thanks a lot, Vidya. And then I'll come to the printers and the publishers who have done this job. Yogesh Dabade, I don't know if he's still here. He's again been the key man in all my books from 2011 onwards. He understands perfectly what I need, and he goes the extra mile to make sure that that is delivered. Rohini, who does all the DTP and the cover designs with me, and she puts up with all my idiosyncrasies that I want this color, this has to be cut here, this title is here, I want this font, download this font, get this here. So all these idiosyncrasies of mine she has been putting up. So these people are the key men for getting. Sonia Khare, she's here. And Sonia Khare has been the first, from the very first book, she's been a copy editor from 2011. She has been a copy editor for voluminous books like the Jnaneshwari, and she was Oxford copy editor. So I'm very privileged to have her for all my books. In fact, during the COVID period, one book of mine I had not got copy edited. So she said, just give it to me, I've got to get that done. So that book also she did. And she gives, and she's like a sounding board, I keep saying. I put up an idea, I make a chapter, I say, should I end it this way, should I end it that way? And she's got a kind of that what will come right. Even this book's theme, I mean, today if you notice this, my clothes, everything has got a black theme or a grey theme. Because the whole theme is grey. And when I put up the cover to her the first time, she said, this goes with the story. It's a grey theme and it should be like this only. So that way she has been a big help. Mr. Amit Patwardhan. He was on this very same position in 2011 and he's still here in 2024 doing the video shooting. And once I give a role to Amit, I don't have to worry, will the projector work, will the sound system work? He'll make sure everything works wonderfully. So thanks a lot, Amit, and I hope to have you every time. And of course, Amit Dhumal, who was looking after SM Joshi, who was all the quick Phirta Rangamanch which you saw, one table going out, another one, that's thanks to him, for Amit Dhumal, and thanks to SM Joshi for giving me help in that respect. Finally, my family. I mean, Medha has been the sheet anchor of all the work that I've done so far. And if it were not her solid support, I would say, I don't think I would have gotten much her way. My son Yash, who reads all the first drafts of my book and makes pertinent comments about what should be there, what should not be there, what should be corrected, what should be redrafted. So he's the first reader always. So he's got a good idea of what a book should be like. So, and all of you readers, I mean, without readers you can't write books. And readers who buy books are the most important. So you have made a facility available outside for you to go ahead and buy the books. And thanks a lot for buying them. Thank you. Until the next one.